Hello. Welcome to Undercover. This is the show that looks between the covers of books by Missoula area authors. My name is Dave Pauley. I'm director of the Missoula Public Library, and this show is jointly sponsored and produced by the Missoula Public Library and Fact and Fiction Bookstore. Our guests today are making an encore appearance. Welcome back. This is Gale Sherman, who is the early childhood librarian at the Pocatello, Idaho Public Library, and her writing partner, Bette Ammon,
Hello,
who works for us as young adult librarian at the Missoula Public Library, and who also produces this show. And welcome to this side of the camera for
Thanks, Dave.
the second time. This is a librarian writing duo who've produced a number of books, and their latest one we have with us here is called Rip-Roaring Reads for Reluctant Teen Readers. Real attractive and striking cover, I think. Like the
You're
first,
right.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I'd like to know is how you define a reluctant reader. That seems to be sort of a catchphrase that you hear a lot, but what does it mean exactly?
Well, a reluctant reader is one who can read but chooses not to. It hasn't been interesting. No one has really found a book or something to attract their attention, so they just choose not to read, and so they do other things instead.
Or they had to do terrible, boring book reports, or maybe they only found boring books to read, and they were discouraged in reading books of their own volition, and so it's called illiteracy. They can read, but they choose not to. It's like kids who can clean, but they choose not to.
A lot of those.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Well, then I presume that the idea for this book came from your experience with these kinds of kids.
Well, the idea had kind of a different sort of history to it.
It started with our editor. We had first finished a Newbery book and had sent one of our regional handbooks, I believe, to the editor of Libraries Unlimited. We were looking for a new publishing house, and we had a meeting at a conference, and he said he was real interested and so on, and asked us if we had any ideas, and sort of listed several of which I don't remember what any of the others were, because he said, what about a book for reluctant readers? And we said, yes, sounds
Well, actually,
great.
he said, how about a book recommending high-low books for teens?
True.
Which is the catchphrase kind of
Yeah,
in the
explain that,
industry.
what that means.
High-low, high-interest, low vocabulary. For years, that was the term that people used to describe that readership and to describe materials for them. And high-low books, they were very stigmatic. They had, and in fact, some libraries still have them. We don't anymore, but they were books that had awful covers. They were real skinny. They had wide margins and poor photographs inside.
Lots of them are out of focus, fuzzy, out of date, and so on.
Written at about a second or third grade level. And so and a lot of people put out lists of these sort of things so that teachers can bring them in their classrooms and try to coax these kids into reading. But no kid who has no interest in reading or a reading problem feels good about carrying around a book that tells the world.
Yeah. It really has a stigma, but also the high-low books encompass another group of readers who are having a lot of problems in actually reading. And so if you're a perfectly good student but you choose not to read and you have a high-low book, it also gives a signal that maybe that kid can't read or is really struggling. And so it sort of is a double whammy when you use those kinds of materials.
But he asked us to do a book for high-low readers, and somehow it evolved into a book for reluctant readers. And he actually wanted us to have the term high-low in the title. And
he
kept sending us proposals that included that term, and we kept ignoring it. And when we got closer to getting it done, we sat down and tried to come up with a better title, and we did. We had a thesaurus, and actually I think Katie and Randy helped. We were all yelling out words and writing down different combinations.
So who would be the intended audience for this kind of a book, which is, we need to get into a little bit about what's between the covers here.
Right.
But first of all, who would be the intended audience for this book, do you think?
Well, if you had a kid who didn't like to read, you as a parent, and you were really interested in selecting some books to bring home, to have available to that child, and you didn't have a clue because there are 5,000 books published every year for kids, and as a parent you had no idea what book was good, what book was interesting, and so on. So as a parent, you'd look at this book.
but it's really intended mostly for librarians and teachers through a library, because they're the ones who are going to be looking for materials to capture the interest of these particular students. The book, with the format and the layout of each of the entries, it's in a way that you can leaf through it very, very quickly. And so, you know, it's organized in an easy way for an adult trying to match a book to a particular reader. But it also is something that even if you're not using the index, if you're just leafing through it, it's real easy to actually pick things up and say, oh, this looks good, or oh yes, this one over here.
And since it says teen readers, it's for middle school, junior high, and high school. Teachers, there are 20 books recommended for middle and junior high school, and 20 book titles for senior high school students.
Now, the format is not just a list of books, but
Right.
you have taken each book. And tell us a little about what you do with the book as far as presenting it.
That's kind of our trademark.
Yeah.
We do in our Young Reader's Choice handbooks and in the Newbery Award book that the guide we wrote. We break down, we talk about the themes involved in the books. We do a readability on every book.
All the genres,
Right.
Various ideas for incorporating the book in the curriculum, either for a student to do a single activity by themselves instead of a boring book report, or for a group of kids to do something, or even for a whole classroom to expand some particular interest that is hit upon in that particular book.
We have 2 book talks. One's a more formal book talk that a teacher or librarian could use to pitch the book or sell it to a student. And then we have one we called In the Aisle, because as public librarians, that's how we sell books a lot of times. Is we have a kid who's looking for a book that's a mystery, and he wants you to really convince him that this book is worth his time. So often a librarian and a teacher will give a 30-second spiel to this kid. And so we did an In the Aisle book talk for every book, just kind of an off-the-cuff, 3 or 4 sentences of real high-interest material to hook their interest.
There's also author information, and so if we knew something about the author, in particular with the book which we are talking about, then we include that information, because we feel that's a way for the child to feel more connected to a particular book.
The greatest example of that, we brought a couple of these. But
Sharing Susan.
Yeah, this book, Sharing Susan by Eve Bunting. In the author information about Eve Bunting, we wrote that she bases a lot of her fiction on real occurrences that are happening in the news, something from a magazine article or a newspaper article. Well, this is about a girl who was switched at birth. She went home with the wrong
Famous
parents.
Kimberly Mays.
Well, now we think Eve Bunting could have a series. This ongoing story,
With the
right?
changes.
But that, and actually that was one of the curriculum implementation ideas we had, or the literary extensions for this book, as students could choose. I mean, there are weirder things in the newspaper than are oftentimes happening in fiction, and students could choose something like that and write their own ongoing story. But that makes it more interesting to read a book by her, to know that that's how she gets her ideas, and it makes that author more human and more accessible too.
Well, what about the way you choose what goes in here? Obviously, it's going to be a limited
Yeah,
selection, and there are
that
thousands
was
of
a
wonderful books out
challenge.
there.
I think if we ever do another one of these, I'd like to say that maybe we could come up with 38 or 41 instead of saying 40, because we decided we had to have 20 books for middle school and junior high age and 20 for high school. And so within that 20, we needed to represent all the genres. We needed nonfiction, we needed a mystery, we needed a romance for high school for sure, we needed
Science
historical fiction, and, so on and so forth, contemporary realistic fiction, we needed some short stories and so on, and we needed the books to appeal to boys and girls, so that if we had a contemporary realistic fiction book that was especially appealing to boys, we needed a counterpart for girls, and so and then you're limited to 20, and so that was really a challenge, in addition to all the other criteria that make a book appropriate for a reluctant reader.
Yeah, it had to have a great looking cover. It had to have a readability that was at least 2 years below the intended audience, so that they would feel successful at reading it and pick up another book when they were done, because that's the whole purpose of of this. It needed to have
A recent publication
Right.
date. We tried to focus on books published from 1990 on, and this book was published in 1990.
Why the recent date? Aren't there some wonderful books that are
Sure,
quite a bit
sure.
older than that?
But when we looked at the research and the work that had been done with the Reluctant Reader books, it was a rehash of the same old tried and true titles appearing on the list over and over again, even books that were published in 1991. And it would be unusual to see a book that had a publication date later than, say, 1985.
and just like
and-
adults like to read
Exactly.
new books. Teenagers are
Kids want to
the
read
same way.
something
Yep.
that's current, something that's up to date. Now, the switched at birth, that isn't something that was an issue a couple years ago. I mean, we know it sort of happened, but the Kimberly Mays event has really put it in the forefront. And this book, for some of those people, I guess they wouldn't appear till about 2000 or
Yeah,
something.
right.
So
The older titles, there are some recommended lists of books to keep those
Okay.
kids reading, and those are where those old tried and true favorites that we all really love, and we don't want kids to ever miss those. But they are included in here, just not in the recommended section where we go into the curriculum.
And there are a lot of lists, like ALA has a Reluctant Reader Committee, okay? And every year they publish a list of books which they think are particularly good. And we certainly looked at that list, but we weren't limited to that list. Sharon, Susan, I don't know if that came from there or not.
I
but,
don't either.
You
We
know,
must have
some
read-
did and some didn't.
Yeah.
But
We looked at about probably 150 titles before we narrowed it down to these, because some books that I loved, Gale would say to me, "But is it rip-roaring?" And I would say, "But I love it." And she'd say, "But is it rip-roaring?" And I'd say, "Well, no." And we did this back and forth, because there were books that she loved, and I'd say, "Oh, God."
oh yeah, there were some books you'd start reading it and you'd be so furious with yourself because you'd wasted all this time finishing it because you were interested in
And
the
you knew it
story.
wasn't a contender.
Even though we knew it wasn't a contender, it wasn't rip-roaring for someone who didn't want to read. And
Rip roaring meaning it's got to grab you in the first few
right
pages.
in
Is
the
that one of the
beginning,
criteria?
yeah,
Yeah.
it's got to grab you.
Yeah, the introduction's got to really pull a reader in. There has to be a minimum of description, lots of dialogue, usually first person. All those are things that a lot of research has shown that kids prefer, and it just makes them simpler. They like to see protagonists that are their age or a little older. The covers need to have characters that really reflect what the true characters look like inside the age, and so on. So many covers don't.
And some books got off the list just because of the cover. It was a great read, but the cover made the protagonist look too young, or it was just a misleading cover. And that is a problem in a lot of books. I mean, covers are really misleading, and we don't think that that's really fair, that you should be more straightforward. Another criteria is the length of the book, okay? And we said that we really didn't want to consider books that were more than 200 pages. But
Then we broke our own rule.
but we'd give it a chance. But there's hardly a book in there that's more than 150, and only a couple that are 175, which brings up an interesting thing, because you have a child who's a reluctant reader, and there's this great book, and the book is, let's say, The Boarding Room by Paul Fleshman, which would be great for a high school history class, and it's 90 pages. And it is a beautifully written book. And there are a lot of teachers out there who have these page criteria that you cannot read this book if it doesn't have 150 pages or more.
So kids aren't looking for books they like, or
They're
books that are
looking for
recommended.
books by how many pages they have.
Yeah.
And that's sort of one of our crusades, is
Yeah.
trying
Yes.
to get.
Well, since you broached that topic, talk about a little what advice you would give to teachers, not only who are going to use this as a guide, but how they're going to get kids interested in reading and keep them reading. English teachers often do this kind of thing. It's got to be X number of pages. It's got to be on this
classic,
recommended
yeah,
list. It's got to be. Do you think
Which-
we should discard some of that stuff?
No,
Yeah.
I don't think
Some of it,
necessarily.
yeah.
Some of it.
For
I think
sure.
there has to be more choice involved, and I think there has to be more regard for individual tastes. There isn't any area of the curriculum that you can't find some great young adult and children's literature to go along with it. Teachers need to provide time in class to read. You know, they make lots of assignments, but rarely do they say it's important enough to give up some class time to do. And even high school teachers need to model reading. They need to show students that it's important. There are just so many terrific books that can be used in addition to the classics. And I think some options available would be great.
Certainly exist. You know, people ask for options if a family isn't interested in something because they think it is for a religious reason or you know, for any number of things like that. There should be some other options that you think, just because it should be more challenging and to meet the fact that so many kids have a different set of interests, and you really need to change your criteria to try to meet the child at this level playing ground, and so they can move on, that you can actually reach to them, hand them a book, and then they can move forward from there.
We didn't mention, we actually dedicated this book to our daughters, Ashley, Gale's daughter, and Katie, who's right there, and because they helped us a lot in the weeding process. We made them read a lot of books and tell us what they thought. Okay, and
it was you know, I actually had to tell Ashley, I said, you know, if I give you this book, if you don't think it's wonderful at the beginning, I don't want you to keep reading it, because they would do what we would do. They would get caught up in it as being really good readers anyway, and so we had to get them to really discern what was a rip-roaring book also.
Well, I have since we've been talking around this a little bit, are we doing all that we can, teachers, parents, librarians, to help kids become lifelong readers?
I don't think so.
No, or obviously we wouldn't have an illiteracy problem with kids graduating from high school and not being able to read at even a third or fourth grade level. Somehow there are lots of cracks that people are falling through. And it's a hard thing to do, to match a kid with a book. We always say it just takes one person to really make a difference in a child's life. It could be the third grade teacher, it could be the 10th grade teacher who makes that kid's eyes open wide and really love to read.
And usually, if it is a teacher who really hits it off, that teacher does it with not just one child in the class, they do it with lots of children. And so we always tell teachers when we're doing workshops that they could be that teacher who makes a significant difference. If they have 25 or 27 kids in their class every year and they teach for 10 years, they're really going to have an impact. And but there are a lot of things, you know, that sort of stand in the way. Teachers are required to do, they have to do this, this, and this, and they feel there's not enough time to sort of do some of the things that would be more exciting. There are changes now with the whole language programs being used in almost all schools now and so on, but there are still a lot of teachers who are very uncomfortable with looking at whole language. They don't want the workbooks to go away. They are comfortable with that support group and so on. And so there's a lot of struggling that's going on within schools.
And I have a concern, I imagine you share this, but I'll ask anyway, is that even if someone is dedicated to helping kids get a hold of these books, they might not be available where they live. They might not have a good school library. They might not have a public library at all.
That's true.
For sure.
That's true. And you really do have to make an extra effort. A lot of these books are available in paperback, which was another criteria. Reluctant readers especially prefer to read paperbacks. They look less scholarly somehow. We talk a lot in there about interlibrary loan, but that was a concern of ours when we chose the books. There's no guarantee that a book, especially for kids or teenagers, will stay in print longer than 6 to 12 months. And that's just a risk we took. We like teachers to have classroom libraries, and lots of bookstores will do book fairs and offer multiple copies of paperbacks and things like that.
And certainly things like the Scholastic Book Club and Firefly and all these other things where you can order books that kids can order, and then the teachers get a credit of some kind, and then they can collect books. Those really help. But if you do a whole language program and you incorporate books like the 40 that we are involved with, is you can buy multiple copies of those books. And so you can actually use those as part of your reading program or your language arts program or something like that. Of course.
So what happens with a book like this? It's going to obviously need a new edition before too long. Is that in the works?
We're already, in fact, we talked a few months about books that we're reading now that are surefire winners. This is going to be Rip Roaring Reads #2.
We're just keeping a little list.
Yeah, that's
we
right.
call it RRR, okay? And so we just have these R's, and you just put a title down that you think
But
would
we actually
be
have
pretty good.
another book in between. If we do a Rip Roaring Reads 2, we have a contract pending with Libraries Unlimited to do a book on picture books for older readers that's curriculum driven.
Picture and illustrated books
Yes,
for older readers.
yes.
And we're really focusing on kids from 4th grade through high school.
That sounds
using
like
them.
it'll be something pretty unique. I haven't seen anything.
There
like
isn't
that.
There
anything
isn't,
like it.
and it's something that we've been interested in, and we've tried to incorporate the use of picture books. In fact, I'm sure we talk about using some picture books in there, and kids are fascinated with them, and lots of them are good introductions to a particular field of interest, and so we're kind of excited about
That'll be
that.
good for reluctant readers too.
Yeah, that's right.
So there is at least a possibility that we would see a
I
second
suppose so.
edition
Yeah,
of that coming.
yeah.
out.
But I
Possibly.
would venture to say that these titles are by such well-known authors and such popular authors that the majority of them will be available in most decent-sized school or public libraries. And if not, they'd be available through interlibrary loan or still in print, especially in paperback, because those are around for a little while.
Because we avoided the high-low market, the authors that we chose, they had to be an accomplished author, and the majority of them, there were very few that it was a first book or a second book. Many of them have a long, long list of publications.
Are you optimistic that people will keep writing things that are
Oh,
going to
sure.
grab kids like
Yeah,
that?
there's
Sure.
finally a market for it. And yeah, if you're R.L. Stein, you're making billions of dollars with Goosebump books. But you know, who needs to sell those to kids? However, they do have their place. And kids who are reading Goosebump books now, they're reading. And they're going to move along to something else. Maybe they'll move along to Stephen King, but that's okay. You know?
A step up.
That's right.
Well,
That's right.
So the theory is in Readers Advising that you will help kids take those steps. Do you see
Right.
that happening in your work, you think?
It's hard in a public library because you don't have that continuity. I mean, you know if you're seeing the same kids all the time in a public library, but you don't see, like a school teacher does, September to May, you know, the kind of improvement.
I think we mostly know about that because a parent will come up and say to us, you know, you got Susie reading this particular book and she's just gone on and read everything by this author, and or he's so excited now and he's reading all the science fiction.
Yeah.
And so the feedback is more from either the parent who's telling you, or that suddenly you keep seeing this child at the same time over and over again and seems really enthused, but it's sort of something that happens by accident.
Well, thanks for being our encore guests on Undercover, and the name of the book again is Rip Roaring Reads for Reluctant Teen Readers, something that parents of teenagers might be interested in taking a look at, and certainly teachers and librarians too.
Thanks,
you very
Dave.
much.
Thanks.
Need to spend a little time talking about what's happening at the Missoula Public Library. First, I want to mention Book Babies. This is a real special program that we do for parents and their very young children ages birth to 2 years. The upcoming one will be Wednesday, April 6th at 10:30 in the morning. We do a special little program, about a half an hour for the whole thing, and part of it is stories and games for the kids, and then we have some kind of a speaker or a program for parents. So you want to mark that on your calendar if you're a parent of very young children. 1994 is our centennial year at the Missoula Public Library. This year marks 100 years of public library service for the city of Missoula and Missoula County. And we're celebrating that in a number of different ways, but one thing we are doing is attempting to get some private donations to supplement our book budget. The demand for books and other materials is increasing all the time, and we are the busiest library in the state of Montana, but we just haven't been able to keep up with that demand through our regular materials budget. We have made some progress, but we need to make more. So we're doing a special promotion this year to try to get people to donate to our Centennial Book Fund, and if you haven't been approached to do so yet and you would like to, please call me at the library, 721-2665, or you can send your contribution to the Friends of the Library at 301 East Main Street, Missoula, Montana 59802. I want to also mention our book discussion group for adults that meets the third Thursday of every month. This upcoming one will be April 21st at 7 o'clock. And if you're interested in participating, or if you just need to know more about that, you can call me at the library. Again, our number is 721-2665, 721-BOOK. National Library Week, which we celebrate once a year in April, is coming up April 17th through the 24th. And we'll be doing a number of special events, including a family story hour for everybody in the family every evening, Monday through Thursday of that week at 7 o'clock. And we'll also be repeating our very successful Food for Fines program. So if you have any overdue materials and you don't want to pay a fine, bring them in with a can or a box or some kind of non-perishable food, and we will forgive your fines, and we donate all that food to the Missoula Food Bank. And last year, we took in over 500 pounds of food. So that's a really good way to contribute to the food bank and also get out of paying your library fines. That will be going on again during National Library Week, April 17th through the 24th. Finally, I want to mention, since it's the first day of spring, summer isn't far off, our summer reading program, and why we do a summer reading program, not just because every library does, although we happen to have an extremely successful one with thousands of kids participating. We do this because we know how important it is to keep kids interested in reading throughout the year, and we offer special programs weekly for school-age kids. We offer a story hour for preschoolers, and we offer lots of good reader's advice and books for kids to keep them interested, just because we know how important it is to read, and for their own scholastic achievement, it's very important for kids to keep reading throughout the summer. So that's some of the things that are going on at the Missoula Public Library within this next month or so, and also all year round. If you have any questions about the library or any of the programs that we're doing, please call us at 721-2665. Remember that we're open 6 days a week, Monday through Saturday, Monday through Thursday, 10 a.m. to 9 p.m., and Friday and Saturday, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. So we have convenient hours, and you can be sure that we'll be there to help you anytime you come into the library. Again, I want to thank Gale and Betty for their wonderful presentation today.
Available at Missoula Public Library.
Oh, right. I'm glad you mentioned that. Yes. So that's a place you can come to take a look at this book and get some ideas for your reluctant teen readers.
Thanks.
Thanks again for being with us.